And it is a fact that the politicians, not the employees, the rank and file employees and the welfare offices, but the politicians in Minnesota let this happen. It is disgusting, Mr. President. Disgusting.
The biggest story this week so far, of course, is the blatant theft of taxpayer dollars committed by the Somali community in Minnesota. All right. And this stuff gets really, really bad. And what we're going to see today, of course, is Senator Kennedy laying out the groundwork of everything that happened, at least that we know so far. And he's going to do it in only the way that he can. So this is a long one, strap in, but it's really good. Before we begin, don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe on this video so we can break through the algorithms. Here we go.
What I'm about to tell you, Mr. President, let me apologize in advance, is deeply disgusting. It's deeply disgusting. I mean, it is clown world on steroids. The federal prosecutors have discovered that for the last 5 years, there has been massive welfare fraud in the great state of Minnesota. Massive. Over $1 billion of American taxpayer money has been stolen. Just stolen. They can call it fraud, but a better term would be stealing. And this fraud has been centered in the Somali community in Minnesota. So far, 59 people have been convicted, 86 have been charged, and 78 of them are of Somali ancestry. That's just a fact. Now, what these criminals did they had 3 very elaborate schemes. The first scheme was centered on supposedly feeding hungry children in the Somali community. A group, a nonprofit run by some people with Somali ancestry. The name of the nonprofit was called Feeding Our Future. Feeding Our Future. Feeding Our Future went to the welfare authorities in the state of Minnesota, which of course was administering federal taxpayer money, and they said, "Look, Feeding Our Children said, Feeding Our Future said, we want to feed hungry children in the Somali community." And the welfare people in state government in Minnesota gave them the money to do that. It started out very small. But the idea was that Feeding the Future, the Somali nonprofit organization, would take this federal taxpayer money, American taxpayer money, and go to businesses, most of which were Somali businesses, in the Somali community, and set up feeding sites where they supposedly would take children to get a hot meal. On paper, it sounded great. As I say, it started out very, very small, just a few $1 million. But eventually, it got bigger and bigger and bigger. And more businesses in the Somali community signed up to be feeding sites. And Feeding Our Future, the Somali nonprofit, kept going back to the Social Services Department in Minnesota saying, we need more money, we need more money. And at the height of the fraud, they were spending about $100 million a year. Not over the lifetime of the program, $100 million a year. There's just one problem. There were no hungry children. There were hungry children. They just weren't getting any of the money. And the businesses, many of which were Somali-owned, which were getting some money to feed the children from Feeding Our Future, the nonprofit that was quarterbacking this whole thing, they weren't giving any of the money to hungry children. They were spending it. These businesses were spending it on yachts and vacations and jewelry and furniture for their home. That was scheme number one. But it got worse. The second scheme was supposedly to help people who are homeless. Remember I said in America, when you're homeless, we'll house you? Well, that's what they were trying to do in Minnesota. A nonprofit was set up, again run by someone of Somali ancestry, and this nonprofit went to a bunch of providers who supposedly were going to provide housing, and they told the welfare authorities in Minnesota that they needed millions of dollars to house people who were homeless. And once again, the program started out small. When they started it in 2020, these crooks started it in 2020, they said, we only need $2.6 million. But then in 2021, they said we need $21 million. And in the following years, they said we need $42 million the next year, then $74 million to feed, or rather to house the homeless, then $104 million a year. Not the total scheme, a year. There's just one problem. None of the money was going for housing. None of the money was going to help people who were homeless. These providers and this nonprofit that was coordinating it just put the money in their pocket. But there's more. They came up with a third scheme. This one makes you want to throw up in a potted plant. This one's centered around autistic children. Once again, in this third program, a group of providers, supposedly medical providers, got together and they went to the welfare authorities in Minnesota and said, we need money to help autistic children. You say, well, that's a wonderful thing to do. And then these providers, once the welfare department at the state government in Minnesota gave them the okay, they went out and started recruiting autistic children. You say, well, okay, we have to get the word out somehow. But they couldn't find very many autistic children. So they started going to parents in the Somali community and saying, can we call your child autistic? Can we certify that your child is autistic? If you'll let us do that, we'll pay you a bribe. Anywhere from $400 to $1,500 a child. Now, once again, the program, it didn't start big. These were sophisticated crooks. And its leader was a woman by the name of Asha Farban Hassan. She was also in, by the way, on the feeding of the children scam as well. And as best we can tell, they approached parents only in the Somali community. But once again, they couldn't find enough autistic children, so they bribed the many parents in the community, gave them money to certify that their children were autistic. In the first year, they were clever. They only asked for $3 million. The second year, in 2019, they asked for $54 million. Then in 2020, they went up to $77 million. And then in 2021, they really got greedy. They went to $183 million. And in 22, $280 million. And in 2023, $400 million. All total, in these three fraud schemes, these crooks stole $1 billion of taxpayer money. Here's I started to say worst part, but let me amend it. Equally bad part. You say, well, hello, how could this happen? Why didn't the people in the Department of Social Services and the Welfare Department in state government, when they saw these claims arising, why didn't they say something? Didn't they go out and check these businesses that were supposedly sites to feed homeless children? Didn't they go talk to some of the children and their parents to see if some of the children really were autistic? Didn't the state authorities go out and say, can you show us one of the homes that you're providing to the homeless people? After all, we're spending $1 billion. They didn't, because the politicians wouldn't let them. And the crooks who were setting all this up, they're pretty smart. I'll give you one example. Remember I talked about the nonprofit involved in feeding the so-called hungry children, called Feeding the Future. The rank and file employees in the welfare office started getting suspicious when the claims went up, and they contacted Feeding Our Future. And they said, hey, what's going on here? You know, we're going to start cutting off these claims because it's getting a little bit expensive. And you know what Feeding Our Future did? They threatened the employees. They said, if you cut off our money, they sent them an email, and they did it by phone. They told the state agency that failing to promptly approve new applicants from minority-owned businesses would result in a lawsuit, feeding accusations of racism that would be scrawled across the news. Feeding Our Futures went to the state and said, if you stop giving us this money, we're going to call you racist and we're going to sue you, and you don't want to be in the news. Now, here's what, and you say, well, why didn't the employees do something? They did. They told the people higher up, the people with the flags in their office. And you know what they did? Nothing. You know why? Well, here's what the legislative auditor in Minnesota said. He said that the threat of litigation and the negative press affected how the state politicians use their regulatory power. And here's what a fraud investigator in the Attorney General's office said. She said, there is a perception that, I'm quoting now, that forcefully tackling this issue would cause political backlash from the Somali community, which is a core voting bloc for Democrats. And in fact, one of the other witnesses in the fraud investigation said, look, I told the prosecutors, let me just give you a cold dish of truth. The 80,000 voting bloc of folks with Somali ancestry, you got to have their votes to win in Minneapolis. And if you're a Democrat and you can't win Minneapolis, you can't win in the state. So the politicians did nothing. Don't just take my word for it. And don't blame the state employees. They tried. In fact, recently the state employees, they just said, look, we've had enough. They posted this. These are over several hundred employees from the Minnesota Department of Human Service who administer this program, who just get up every day and go to work and do their job and want to help people. This is what they posted on social media. I'm quoting now, Mr. President. Governor Tim Walz is 100% responsible for massive fraud in Minnesota. I'm sure he wasn't the only one, because this fraud was an open secret. But I'm quoting from what the employee said. Governor Tim Walz is 100% responsible for massive fraud in Minnesota. We let Tim Walz know of fraud early on. That's the employees talking. Hoping for a partnership and stopping fraud, but no, we got the opposite response. Tim Walz systematically retaliated against whistleblowers, using monitoring, using threats, using repression, and did his best to discredit fraud reports. Instead of partnership, we got the full weight of retaliation by Tim Walz and an indifferent mainstream media. It's scary, isolating, and left us wondering who we can return to.
So this is just like Senator Kennedy said, all right? This is the clown world on steroids. This should not have been allowed to happen. And to me, the cover-up is the big story, okay? Because I expect criminals to do criminal acts, all right? But I expect our officers, our elected officials, to go ahead and investigate and stop that. And thank goodness that actually happened, but of course was all in the face of the efforts of the Democrats and Tim Walz. And notice how it all kind of ties in to the whole Doge investigation thing, right? All of the NGOs, all of the nonprofits, everything that was discovered that was just writing blank checks, giving out all of this free money to entities for who knows what purpose, okay? And all it took was a simple investigation, someone finally looking into it to say, hey, guess what? There's a whole bunch of fraud here. And now we have convictions, we have suspects, we have things actually happening. And all it took was someone to actually look into it. And of course, this is the big failure of Tim Walz. He wanted to cover all of this stuff up. He wanted to sweep it under the rug. And why? For votes, because you couldn't risk turning that voting bloc of Somalians against you, because otherwise you couldn't win. And that was why he did it. And also, of course, there's the racial component, right? You don't want to appear being racist. And that, of course, was a cudgel that the Somali community actually used, right, against the investigators and most likely against the politicians as well. They said, if you look into us, if you deny these claims, then we are going to sue you and castigate you as being racist yourself. And as we all know, there's nothing worse than that to a leftist, okay? Because this is the same thing that was happening over in England. You actually had police, you had elected officials saying, hey, you know what? Ignore the grooming gangs that are going on, because if you investigate them, you might appear to be biased. You might appear to be racist yourself, right? This is the exact same type of thing where you have identity politics being used as a cudgel just to avoid law enforcement, just to avoid incarceration, investigations, right? The actual criminality that's going on. And unfortunately, Tim Walz and his upper up people all fell for it. They all kowtowed to it. They just wanted to get re-elected. They didn't want to upset this community. And all I have to say to the Somali community, right, if any of these people are not natural born citizens, we have to go ahead and denaturalize them, incarcerate them, and then deport them. Because the worst punishment we can give all of these criminals is to send them back to their crap hole country. And the only last thing I really have to add is this. How many other blue states is this happening in, right? How many other places where they're not allowed to actually investigate fraud, reports of fraud, actual fraud, is this going on in? All right, because we obviously have one example right here, because something that actually just came out from the Trump administration is we're having the USDA saying, hey, all of you blue states that are denying us your SNAP data, you are going to be denied these funds, because if you're not telling us how this is spent, who it's going to, that of course opens up the system for fraud. And guess what we've been finding an awful lot of lately, because all it takes is people who actually care to look into it. And then, of course, it all gets uncovered. So this, of course, is the correct and right thing to do. We have to have oversight of our government officials, our government entities. And if we're writing checks, we have to have oversight in terms of where it's going and what it's being spent on. This should all be common sense. And we all just kind of assumed this was happening. But of course, when Elon Musk came in with Doge, it opened up a lot of people's eyes in terms of the waste, the fraud, and abuse. And here it is coming in a tidal wave for all of us to see clearly. And I thank Senator Kennedy for laying it all out so succinctly. So thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe, and say hi to your mom for me. Do you like t-shirts? Of course you do. And now you can support the channel by buying an Angry Teacher t-shirt designed by me, Angry Teacher. So if you like America, if you like freedom, if you like liberty, then go ahead and click the link in the description, where all designs, of course, are 100% mother approved. So enjoy yourself and find something you like today.